Hello, and welcome to CyberBible 2.0, an online Bible study sponsored by Union United Methodist Church of Quincy, Illinois. We're going to begin with the Gospel according to Luke. This Gospel is actually the first of a two-part work which includes the Acts of the Apostles, or simply the Book of Acts. Together, they form the earliest surviving history of the Church, beginning with just before the birth of Jesus and continuing until sometime just before the death of the Apostle Paul around 67 AD. The works are directed toward someone named Theophilus in Greek, which translates as God-lover. This might be the name of someone who commissioned the work. However, it might not be a proper name so much as a title. The books may be addressed to anyone who loves God and who is seeking to better understand the message and origins of the Christian faith. While there's no certainty about the date when these books were written, it seems likely it was sometime between 62 and 67 AD. None of the authors of the biblical Gospels are actually named within their works. Early leaders of the church attributed this Gospel to a Syrian Gentile convert to Christianity who was actually named Lucas, who worked as a doctor. In the book of Acts, he writes about traveling with Paul, and in Paul's letter to the Colossians, there's a reference to a man whom Paul calls Luke, the beloved physician. There's little doubt, even among the most skeptical Bible scholars, that this is the same man who wrote the Gospel, as well as the book of Acts. While Paul did know Luke, there is no evidence that Luke ever personally met Jesus, and he makes no claims to that effect. His Gospel is based upon other sources. It appears that at least two of these sources were works written before his Gospel. One is the Gospel according to Mark. It appears that both Luke and Matthew had copies of Mark's work and used it extensively. In fact, virtually all of the material found in Mark's Gospel is contained within the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. Fully 41% of the material in Luke's Gospel and 45% of the material in Matthew's Gospel closely or exactly match materials found in the Gospel according to Mark. But scholars also noted that Matthew and Luke had a significant amount of material in common, again often word for word, which is not found in Mark. This material makes up 23% of Luke's Gospel and 25% of the material found in Matthew's work. It's also worth noting that all of this shared material, which is not from Mark, is in the form of sayings of Jesus rather than stories about him. This has led scholars to conclude that Luke and Matthew also had access to a second written work which was being circulated in the church, made up of sayings of Jesus. This book has not survived in an independent form, but it seems highly likely that it did exist, and scholars call it Q after the German word Quelle, which means source. Between them, Mark and Q account for about 64% of Luke's and 70% of Matthew's Gospels. The remaining 36% of material found in Luke is unique to his Gospel and comes from unknown sources within the early church. Among the unique materials found in Luke's Gospel are the parables of the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son. These stories may have come to Luke from other written sources, or they may have come to him by word of mouth, via what is known as the oral tradition. Now, a lot of modern critics express skepticism about how accurately information can be transmitted by word of mouth, especially over a period of what may have been 30 years after the events actually took place. Now, we've all played the telephone game in which a story is relayed from one person to another through several players. And usually at the end of the circuit, the story has undergone so many changes it's barely recognizable. But we live in a very different time, in which information is transmitted and stored in ways that are radically different from the first century. And this has led us to impose a modern bias on oral traditions which reflects our contemporary shortcomings, rather than the capabilities of ancient peoples. We live in an age of information overload. It's estimated that the Sunday edition of the New York Times contains more written information than most people were exposed to in their entire lives in the 1700s. The laptop computer on which I'm recording this message has sufficient memory to contain all of the written material that existed in the world in Jesus' time. Faced with this avalanche of info, we cannot possibly memorize it all today. So what we have done is to learn how to access the information we need, which is stored elsewhere, in books, papers, hard drives, tapes, compact discs, etc. For the most part, we don't memorize the primary information. We memorize how we can get it from recorded sources. This has made us pretty lousy at memorization. We let our technology do that for us. If you need, for an example, a phone number, say of a friend or family member or business associate, you now count on your cell phone to do that for you. But in Jesus' time, people didn't have this technological crutch, nor were they constantly distracted by the blizzard of information that comes at us from all sorts of media. They listened. And when it was important, they listened very carefully and tried their best to report it accurately. There are examples of people who've memorized the entire Bible or the entire Quran. A Japanese man accurately memorized the numerical progression of the mathematical equation pi to 83,431 digits. The modern assumption that the oral tradition is inherently and grossly inaccurate is not entirely fair when you take it into account that both the cultural reality of that time and the capabilities of the people who are wishing to memorize and transmit what they considered to be profoundly important information. In addition, it's also likely that at least some of the other materials found in Luke's Gospel were also recorded in written form first, years before he acquired them. Some skeptics poo-poo the idea that Luke could write an authoritative history of Jesus' ministry because he never personally met the man. Yet they will accept the work of modern historians writing about figures like the Caesars or Alexander the Great more than 20 centuries later. Hardly primary sources. It's something of a double standard. While Matthew's Gospel is clearly targeted at a primarily Jewish audience, Luke's is clearly written for a Gentile one. His goal is to show that the ministry and message of Jesus is not one which is limited to the Jewish nation and faith. Instead of the arc of these two books, he shows the march of Christianity from an obscure Galilean sect to a faith that spans and transcends national and cultural boundaries which divided the world then as they do now. Luke also has a clear emphasis on social justice in the good news. He shows Jesus as a champion of the poor, the marginalized, and the outcast. In our next installment, we will begin to get into the text of the Gospel. If you would like to use an online text, I recommend you access Bible Gateway, which offers several English translations, including the New International Version, which will be the version we will most often use for the purposes of this study. This is an interactive study. You are free and welcome to post questions and comments. Now, sadly, YouTube does seem to attract some people who hide behind their anonymity to engage in abusive and profane posts, or they post spam. I will do my best to police the site and remove anything like that. This does not mean that I will only post interpretations that agree with mine, but they need to be made in a respectful and thoughtful manner, and I will respond in a similar spirit. If you have a scriptural or theological question that's off topic, that's also okay. I may choose to respond privately or to set up a separate video on that topic, but I will try to respond as thoughtfully, thoroughly, and respectfully as possible. I hope we will return for future installments of CyberBible 2.0. I will announce them as they are completed on our church website and Facebook pages. The website is most easily accessed through www.qumc.org, and you can find our Facebook page by searching for Union United Methodist Church of Quincy, Illinois. I'm Bob Morwell, pastor of the church, and I thank you for watching the inaugural video of CyberBible 2.0. May God bless you.